Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. I am one of your hosts, Maxwell Alexander Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist, former lead fiction writer to Sony's EverQuest Next, and teach writing all over the world. As always, my co-host Marie is here.
Hello, my name is Marie Mullaney. I run a fantasy YouTube channel and I am a fantasy author.
And today we're going to actually look at a piece of flash fiction that was sent to us. It's very humorous, and it was basically written off of something that Marie said in a past episode. So we'll get into that. But before we do, please help us out. You're here, you're listening, you're obviously getting something from this. Just do us the favor, like the podcast or the YouTube video, share it, send us comments on it. We're here to try and divulge information that will help you on your writing career. And sure, we can guess at what everybody's looking at, but if you don't give us feedback, we don't know exactly what you're looking for. So please, you can reach us at releasingyourinnerdragon@gmail.com. But also, it's very important to fight the algorithms and make sure that we do get out there and find other people that might be interested in our topics. So like, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. I really appreciate it. All right. So we're going to talk about a flash fiction. Why don't you set up kind of why this was written and what you said and all of that?
Sure. So we were talking about, I think actually we were critiquing somebody else's work, or we were discussing one of our own or something like that. And I said, I don't really like it when people say, her eyes darted across the room, or words like that, because in my head I have this image of eyeballs leaping out of your face and just going all over the place all by themselves. Like, I don't normally have a problem with that kind of fingers did this or whatever, but when it's eyeballs, it doesn't feel right. and so Drake says he doesn't have any problem with that, and I said, it's just a stylistic difference.
So it was actually, I think we were actually looking at something that I had written.
Yeah.
And I think the term was he cut his eyes toward them or something like that. And I use that term a lot because I actually, to me, when you cut your eyes, you're actually like, you're not turning your head, you're just turning your eyes. And so I think that that's a good way to say that. However, I may have been guilty the time or two of saying what you said, her eyes darted about the room. I do try to avoid that because I do kind of agree that maybe that's taking too much liberties, and I would rather use her gaze darted around the room, because then it's a little, but you can't say she cut her gaze to, John or something like that. So basically the discussion was on eyes, and we just have stylistic differences, and no matter which way you do it, you're going to make some readers happy and you're gonna make some readers not happy because it's subjective and you'll never please everybody.
Yeah. Now, one of our longtime listeners heard this conversation and decided to write a piece of flash fiction, which is a piece of fiction under 300 words, which he then submitted to us for critiquing, which we will take a look at now and discuss what we thought of it. So I'm going to share my screen. For those of you on voice-only podcasts, I will, as always, try to be as clear as possible about what we're seeing on the screen. For those of you on YouTube, you should be able to see the piece of fiction now. So I'm just going to read it probably straight through, and then we'll discuss it. Rolling on the floor, bouncing off the walls, Blue settled in a corner of the crowded room. He tore away from his brother Green so he could be alone. Finally, he thought to himself. Green's astigmatism wouldn't hold Blue back any longer. Tonight, all the work Blue put in to compensate for his brother's weakness would finally pay off. It wasn't Green's fault he was born with astigmatism. But now, unshackled by his pair, Blue was ready to make his solo debut. The house party was packed with eyeballs. Many celebrities worth keeping an eye on, including sparkling Miss Ruby, were there. Blue had seen red carpet-worthy eyes be blinded by the flashing cameras of the paparazzi. My time to shine, all eyes on me. Blue barreled toward the center of the room, knocking into his fellow eyeballs, scratching Miss Ruby's eyes, and pooled into muddy browns. At once, everyone was rolling their eyes at him, laughing. Make it stop, he thought to himself. If he could shed a tear, he would. He started to fret, searching the room for his brother, but the room seemed bigger than ever. As he misjudged the distance to the center of the room, so he too failed to perceive his brother's support. Defeated, he roved back to the corner. Blue cut to green. Green rolled to blue. Blue melted. I'm sorry. Blue hopped into his rightful place, left of green. Together, they rolled into the center of the room, past starlit Ruby, and without looking back, rolled home.
The flash fiction is hard, and I do want to start by talking about the good of this piece before we get into the line editing. I mean, everything can be line edited. I was reading something last night, a piece from the Son of the Empire that I'm going to use for marketing, and just reading it, I'm like, oh, I could change that, and I could do this, and like you just can never not line edit, no matter how far you come on this. But and it's also, you know, and I've admitted this before. I don't write short. I don't like writing short. I'm not good at writing short. I don't think short. You know, it's why I write such big, long, epic stories, is because I want to take time to really explore the stuff. And so when I see something done really well like this, it's even more amazing to me because I don't have those skills. And so, I mean, the two things, I think you're going to talk about connecting to the character. What I want to talk about is the hardest thing, which is the thematic elements. So a lot of short stories don't even get thematic elements. They're more about, and that's actually the way I write short stories. I don't write for a thematic element. I write for the twist, more like a Twilight Zone episode. And those are fun to read and they're short. And so you don't really need that lasting impact because the twist can do that for you. But there's an incredibly strong human thematic element here. You know, you have these two eyeballs that are in a relationship, they're brothers. And one of them now at this point in their lives only sees the other's faults and feels very angry that they have to overcome this other person's faults. And that's such a great thematic element, because any long-term, I mean, we're married for 23 years, we've been together for 25, any long-term relationship, you can fall into this where you start focusing on the problems of the other person, the things that you overlooked, the things that were there from the very beginning and you knew they were there, but you overlook the things that they bring to the relationship. And so, I mean, that's here. Like in 300 words, they have a relationship. Blue only looks at Green's faults. Blue finally does something about it and basically divorces himself from, you know, Green, goes it on alone, finds out that what his brother brought to their relationship is needed for them to be successful, and then comes back and apologizes and is forgiven, and then they go home. Like, that's a lot of a thematic element shoved into 300 words. That is the thing that impresses me the most about this. And I know you want to talk about connecting to characters.
Definitely. But I mean, it ties into that thematic element as well. It is almost instantaneous that, so you find out, okay, blue's torn away from green. We'll get to that line editing moment. But then here we have the line, Green's astigmatism wouldn't hold blue back any longer. Now, I know that we have all been in this place in our lives where, much as you might not want to feel that way, all you see in like somebody you're in a relationship with, all you see is their faults. All that you can see is how they're holding you back. And that, to me, is a very connecting moment to relate back to blue, to connect to blue. And we're going to talk later in the podcast. We're going to come back to this point, because I have encountered over the course of this week a number of chapters in Critique Circle that I've been critiquing that make the same mistake. They don't connect the reader to the character. So we'll come back to that. But that, to me, stood out given this past week that I've had critiquing, it stood out to me that even in a piece this short, there was that connection of like, yeah, okay, I got you, Blue. I understand where you're coming from. It's not a good place. I don't approve of where you're coming from, but I understand where it comes from. We've all been there.
And it also has conflict.
Yeah.
It brings conflict instantly into the story, the conflict of our relationship.
Yeah. And that both of those keep me invested in reading. Now, obviously, it's a very short piece, so it's very easy to finish, but it does keep me invested in reading to the next paragraph. Okay, we do have to talk about some line editing things.
Well, let's talk about some overall stuff first, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple things that, and I get that you have to keep it under 300 words, but there's a couple things that were expanded upon in here that take up words that I don't feel add to the story. And there's some things that I think should have been expanded upon that would have really impacted it. So without talking about what I would cut, because it's subjective, let's talk about what I feel is missing. What I feel is missing is the downfall. So, you know, that line, Blue barreled toward the center of the room, knocking into his fellow eyeballs. I feel like that needed just a little bit more of what he's actually failing at. And then after everyone is laughing at him, instead of just telling me, I do love the line, if he could shed a tear, he would. I really, really love that. But I feel like there should have been just a little bit more emotion there of the self-doubt, the self pity or the embarrassment or you know, something that makes me relate to the negativity of what Blue is feeling.
I agree. I feel like the moment of failure could have been a bigger emphasis. Like, why does he fail? Why does he barrel like this? Does he actually try to say something, to do something, and then fail because he's without his brother? That could be a little bit more emphasized.
I mean, even a few words like in the excitement of his newfound freedom, he didn't notice, you know, the rut in the carpet, whatever. I mean, again, I don't want to write anything for him, but this is a stretch. Like, this is a good piece. So it's, you know, anytime you're critiquing something, you want to throw in something that you feel could actually make it better. But again, all of this is subjective, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it would make it better. Especially when you have that 300 word limitation. If he's trying to stick to the, I mean, you know, the writer could also be just like, I don't care. This is just how many words it ended up. So if it ends up 400 words, because I add 100 words to expand upon that, you know, he might be perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times in contests anyway, and they still call it flash fiction, I'm pretty sure, but you know, there's a lot of contests out there that will say less than 1,000 words. Whether they call it flash fiction or not is beside the point. But I do know there's a lot of contests out there that'll be 1,000 words and less. So that would be my suggestion of how could we take this to the next level. Would just be that's it.
Yes. I think that also here there could be a little bit more, like, and this again, like yours, it's very subjective, but there could be a little bit more of Green accepting Blue back.
Yep. A little bit more of the forgiveness and what that makes Blue feel. Because then I feel like he's earned it. But again, these are very, very minor things. All right. I know you're dying for this first line.
You can save yourself 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 words to put some more emotion in, just by cutting the absolute redundancy of he thought to himself.
because there's no one else to think to than yourself.
Yeah. And you don't need the he thought because we are in a limited POV.
Yeah. And yes, I would italicize the finally like you did, because we do italicize my time to shine, all eyes on me, to show that that's an inner monologue. And we also italicize make it stop.
Yes.
Now, for formatting purposes, I wouldn't italicize I'm sorry. I'd put quotes around those because Blue is actually saying that to Green.
Yeah.
So to make sure that the reader understands that this is vocalized out loud and not internally, we don't want to just italicize it with no quotes. We want to actually have him say the words.
Yeah.
And I get that, you know, maybe he did go, well, wait a minute, eyes don't have a mouth. So, but I mean, you have eyeballs running around the room. So, yeah,
like, I mean, you have
somehow
eyeballs
they
running.
Can talk.
Yeah, they can talk. They have those little mouth emoji things, like the movies, whatever. Like that new movie Strays.
Or maybe the iris actually moves up and down. I don't know. But like you're not going to hurt me on the suspension of disbelief if I hit that line and they're actually saying words and I'm like, wait a minute, eyeballs don't have mouths. How could they ever? This story's terrible.
At this point, I've accepted eyeballs jumping out of a face and rolling around a room by themselves.
And
I can
also
take them talking.
Intelligent and having their own thoughts and brains and So you can't give me the garbage of, but they don't, you know, that'll break the realism of the story. So
so that absolutely. Then obviously this whole story is set around eyes, and I get that, but there is a lot of repetition of the word eye, and
that may be on purpose.
Yeah, but it gets a little overly.
Right. What I would probably do if I was writing this piece is just use the word I for the race.
Yes.
So in words like many celebrities worth keeping an eye on, maybe you could write something like many celebrities worth being associated to or hanging out with, or, you know, whatever. We can look for other terms to take those. Now I get that the writer probably was like, I'm going to use as many eyes as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And again, that's fine. Because I don't really have necessarily, because of that's the shtick, I don't have a problem with that redundancy. The redundancy that I have is like, he thinks finally at the end of the first paragraph, and then we have finally in the middle of the second paragraph because it finally pays off. There's a few other redundancies like that.
Yeah.
That I'm much more concerned about than eyes, since eyes is the actual kind of plot device that we're playing with.
The two that stood out to me while I was reading, finally didn't bother me so much, but these eyes here bugged me a bit. Because it's used so because it's used so much. And the other one that bugged me was here, the room
and room.
The room and the room. That was terrible.
And there's also a room in the next sentence.
Yes. So that stood out to me. Those are the repetitions that I felt were a bit egregious. This sentence is too long.
There's two sentences in here that are really rough.
Yeah.
That one, and then the many celebrities worth keeping an eye on is also a pretty rough sentence as far as what we can do with it or whatever. So like on the first one, while you're typing, many celebrities worth keeping an eye on, including sparkling Miss Ruby, were there. So first of all, it's a lot of information. I like the addition of actually naming one of the eyeballs. Miss Ruby is nice. Adjectives should be used where they roll like butter. So including sparkling Miss Ruby, that doesn't roll off my tongue. So I wouldn't do that. I might do something including Miss Ruby. Her iris is sparkling like gems, something like that.
Yeah.
But sparkling Miss Ruby is not a poetic combination of words. And so I do pay attention to how things sound together. Last night, one of the people wrote, they were talking about some buildings, and they described them as the buildings sat, or the buildings made a half moon circled around the center of town. And I'm like half moon circled. My brain wants to connect the word circle to half moon because of the fact, and not to the buildings. So the buildings were shaped like a half moon and they circled the center of town. But when you put half moon and circle back to back, my mind wants to connect the circle to half moon, since half moon is in a circle anyway. So I would break that up as well. It's just the flow of the words.
Yeah.
And then even fixing it like this, oh no, you did it in 2 sentences. Yeah. I thought you were going somewhere else. Sorry. Yeah. So your rewrite was celebrities sweeten the air, including Miss Ruby, period. Her irises sparkled like gems, mirroring the red carpet. Like, now you're actually tying it into world building. You're organically setting the scene without me saying, and the carpets were red. So yeah, that's awesome.
Then the next sentence doesn't actually make sense to me. Like, I'm not sure what purpose it serves. So Blue had seen red carpet worthy eyes be blinded by the flashing cameras of the paparazzi.
Right.
So I think this is supposed to be something like, he wants to, be part of that paparazzi crowd or something like that. So I think this would be better served to say something like Blue strained toward the blinding flashes of the paparazzi.
Either way, I had a different mind of fixing that. Works much better. Basically, the big problem is it's a flashback. You went into past perfect and there's no reason for it. So either this way, this is a great way to do it. The thing that came into my mind was just describing it. The house party was packed with eyeballs. As the celebrities entered, they were blinded by the flashing cameras of the paparazzis, period. Even Miss Ruby was here. Her iris is sparkling like gems, mirroring the red carpet, so it can be much more active in its writing, where it's all happening right now as we're experiencing it. Slipping into past perfect tense with the had seen really dampens the
immediacy.
Thank you, of the word, of the paragraph, the moment of time that we're in.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. You don't need flashbacks this early in your story, especially when your story is only 300 words. And more, in your first chapter, if you find yourself writing the word had, really think about it. I'm not saying don't do it, but really think about whether you need it right then. Because I know it's not an official flashback, but it is still information about the past, when what you're trying to do is connect the reader to the character in the now.
Right. And I'm definitely not as sensitive to that as you are. And again, this is just difference in styles. There's no right or wrong way for this. But for me, if I need to go, he frowned at his sister. They'd been fighting since last night. Like, it's such a, technically it is a piece of back information, but the fight last night is not going to be interesting. Like, it's this moment. It's them it's, and I just made that up, so I don't know what's going on. But
Yeah.
if I'm writing this scene and it's about them making up, and that's the important part of this, then throwing a "they had been fighting since last night" is just kind
I
of setting the moment.
I hear you, but I would say that that can still be made more immediate by saying last night's fight tumbled through his thoughts.
True.
You know what I mean? Like, how does
But to
last
me,
night's fight affect right now?
so that's great. And I love it when we get into discussions
Yeah.
like this, because it shows two sides of things, because there's no wrong way.
Mm.
It's just how you do it. So to me, last night's fight tumbled through his thoughts is an actual flashback. We are actually flashbacking to that, as opposed to "they had been fighting since last night" is, again, no right or wrong way. But
Yeah.
to me, I would write it "they had been fighting,"
Mm.
because I don't want to even think about the fight last night. I just want the
Fair.
audience to know that they've been fighting since last night.
Lo-
So
yeah.
neither's wrong.
So last night's fight still left a sour taste in his
Right.
mouth.
Right. That's exactly where I was going to go with
Yeah.
that. The words he had said to her in anger last night still weighed heavy on his mind.
Yeah.
Or since waking up this morning, that would have been he had.
The angry words from last night lingered on the edge of his tongue.
Right. Or regret from saying, or whatever, however you want to do it.
Yeah.
There's a million ways to do it. Now we're getting incredibly nitpicky on one single thing that no one else is even going to notice.
I know. I'm just but yeah.
No. These are things that we think about. Like these are discussions that me and you have offline, like when we're actually editing our stuff. So
do think about "had" very carefully early on in.
And one of my macros literally highlights all your heads,
so
that I can go through and look at them and go,
Mine
do
too.
I really want that?
Yeah.
But again, that's just a difference in style. You are much more, there's things that
I'm much more picky on flashbacks. And it's just because I have, because I'm on Critique Circle and I critique so many people of very different skill level, I encounter so many flashbacks. And it is such a common mistake that I'm just an absolute martinet on it. I'm like, no, no. Resist the urge.
This is the reason why I say you cannot grow as a writer unless you're critiquing others.
Yeah.
Because nothing grew me faster through my career than when I'm critiquing others and seeing the same mistakes over and over. Because then those mistakes, where the first time you run into them, you're like, this kind of weakens it a little bit. The 1,000th time you run into the same thing, you're just like, burn it to the ground. Like, it's still the same mistake. It's still just like a little thing.
I see a flashback now. I'm like, I'm gonna reach through the screen and strangle you.
So it's just but that's what we need as writers. We need to pound it into our heads over and over and over and over again, so that it does become. It's sort of like now when somebody puts an S on the end of a word word. So if you write twards and you put an S on the end of it, I lose my mind. I'm like, I will shoot you in the face. So, but it's just because, after years and years and years, they become way more intensive than they really deserve to be. I mean, these are all still minor mistakes, but when you loathe them that much, you will not do it in your writing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the beautiful thing about it. It's not about loathing it in other people's writing. It's about loathing it in their writing to such a degree that you can't even bring yourself to do it in your own writing. So now you've improved.
And then the next paragraph is okay, except I'm not sure what this sentence again is overly long. So the sentence that's overly long is "Blue barreled toward the center of the room, knocking into his fellow eyeballs, scratching Miss Ruby's eyes, and pooled into muddy browns."
Right.
So it's too many actions too fast on each other.
Well, let's count them.
Yeah.
So blue barreled toward the center of the room. That's 1. He knocked into his fellow eyeballs. That's 2. He scratched Miss Ruby's eyes. That's 3. And he pulled. That's 4. It is 4 actions. And technically, if you want to get even more detailed, you could say it's 5, because you could say not only did he barrel, but he also barreled in a very specific direction toward the center. So technically, if you really want to get down to it, you can go down all the way to 5.
But even 4 is just too many.
Yeah, it's too many things. Because remember when I talk about run-on sentences, I use run-on sentences all the time, but it's always stuff that doesn't matter. So Blue walked into the kitchen, grabbed a pot, filled it with water, and put it on the stove to heat. Like, yes, it's the same number of things that are in this sentence, but everyone has boiled a pot of water. It is not important. We don't need to see every single action of that because they're not important. Every single one of these 4 things is important. Every single one of them are things that I want to actually experience. I don't want to just gloss over. I'm not boiling a pot of water here. I'm literally knocking into my fellow eyeballs. What does that look like? What does it feel like? How does that make, Blue feel? He scratches Miss Ruby's eye. How did she react to that? Like, and then why does he pool into Muddy Brown's?
Yeah.
So like, obviously he's enamored with Brown or whatever. So by doing this in this big run-on sentence, when all of those actually matter, that's where you get, that's a bad run-on sentence, not a good run-on sentence. I do think there are good ways to write run-on sentences when all the information is related, all of it is one action. Because even like my boiling a pot of water, it's all one action. I mean, yes, it's a bunch of little actions that comprise the bigger action, but you have to get the pot, you have to fill it with water, you have to put it on the stove to heat. So, and you have to walk into the kitchen for that because where everything is at. So those 4 things has to happen to boil a pot of water.
Yeah.
You could also write, he boiled a pot of water without breaking it down. I think that's probably a good test, a litmus test for if this sentence works well. Is there another way to say everything in the run-on sentence in one thing? So in my case, I could say he boiled a pot of water, and everything can be assumed, but there's no way that you can say one line to combine all this stuff up and them actually understand all of it. You could say, then Blue went and made a fool of himself in front of everybody, but now it's so vague, it could be anything. For all I know, he dropped his pants and exposed himself. I don't know, because there's nothing there for me to grab onto. So yeah, that's definitely a good example of a bad run-on sentence, because we want to experience those motions.
So I don't know if this works. I just put it together as different sentences and put something like Blue barreled toward the center of the room. The edge of the carpet caught him sideways and he rolled, scratching uncontrollably. And he rolled uncontrollably, scratching Miss Ruby. Shocked, he scattered away. Brown hit his irises and he pooled. So obviously that's very quick, but something like that just to make the actions broken up.
Yeah, how many words are in the original sentence?
22.
And how many in your rewrite?
34.
So you added 12 words.
12 words.
We already cut 8 just by cutting out he thought to himself.
Yeah.
So like this is the point, is it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Anything else about that line? I want to move on to another one.
We can move on.
So second to the last sentence in that same paragraph. At once, everyone was rolling their eyes at him. So was is always a red flag. Are you writing in passive voice? Are you telling blah, 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 blah? And so like, it's so passive, like at once, everyone was rolling their eyes. Like, no, first of all, we don't need the at once. Stage direction in prose, in my opinion, weakens the piece. So then he did this, and all this other stuff. There's no reason for it, because when you're writing in limited, everything is happening for the reader when they're reading a sentence. So you don't have to say then, he punched him in the face, then dodged to the corner, because dodge to the corner came after he punched him in the face. So of course I'm going to think it happened after that. I'm not going to read it out of order. So at once is something that I don't feel is needed. But then we've got everyone was rolling their eyes at him, and that's just passive. And you know, it's so much stronger to write it in active. Everyone rolled their eyes at him, laughing. Yes. As opposed to the was. And you should go through and you should highlight all your was's, and don't. I've got a person, well, again, I had to cancel my private writers groups for now because I'm doing so much with the writers room. But you know, I had a person in my private group that she just, for whatever reason, locked on, I'm going to remove every single was from my manuscript. And even though every single week we told her, don't do this, you're causing yourself to write some really awkward sentences that aren't fun to read. It's not about cutting every was. Sometimes the sky was blue and it's fine. But you want to look at each one of them, which means highlight all your was's and look at each sentence that has a was. And then you can go, oh, well, this, you know, was rolling can easily be turned into roll. And make it so much stronger. And that's what you're really looking to do. You're looking to go through and just make sure you haven't used a was in a very weak, passive way, as opposed to cutting every single one of them. It's not about that. It's about making sure you're not using them in a weak way, which was rolling is way weaker than everyone rolled their eyes at him. Because it's so active, it's so immediate, versus everyone was rolling their eyes at him. Like it's not, it doesn't feel as in your face and as active, which is why it's passive. It's kind of where those terms come from.
Passive voice is definitely something you want to try and avoid in action. It's different in dialogue. People do often talk in passive voice, especially when they're trying to hide stuff. You know, so but in active, in prose, you want to go active as far as possible. And then I'm not sure that I like laughing all by itself. So I just changed it to laughter rocked him, because what is the impact of the laughter on him?
Right. I wouldn't do it as a standalone sentence. You know, we've talked about standalone sentences, you know, fragmented sentences and how powerful they are. We've talked about that several times. But laughing in this instance, I don't think brings any power to it. So either beef it up like you did here, which is laughter rocked him, or mute it down a little bit and just everyone rolled their eyes at him, comma, laughing. That also works perfectly fine. Now, and the reason why I would go towards the toning it down is because I would want to use, no, you don't have to take it out.
Actually, I do, because it is a flash fiction. So you do actually want the word reduction.
Okay. Because, well, actually, I was going to go the next step, because the reason why I would tone it down to just comma laughing is then I would write a sentence of how that makes him feel. You know, shame, lanced his cheeks red or whatever. Something that shows me of how the laughing affects the character. It's not good enough just to tell me everyone rolled their eyes at him and he laughed. I want to know, okay, great, that happened, but how does that affect the character? Remember, it's always the how and the effect. How do they do what they do and what effect does it have on them? Not the what they did. I'm sorry. It's not the what and the how. It's not what they did and how they did it. Those have to be said, but that's not what's important. It's the why and the effect. Sorry, I missed my own training. So why did they do what they did and the effect it has on it? So we know why he does this, because he feels like he's being held back by his brother. What is the effect of it is he ends up making a fool of himself. And so those are the things that I want to lean into. The what he does and the how he does it, I'm going to actually use less words. And the why he's doing it and the effect it has on him are where I'm going to spin my words to beef those up. And notice, literally, that's exactly what we've been talking about this entire time. We've been talking about lessening the how and the what and raising the why and the effect, because the why and the effect are what affects the reader and connects the reader to the character and the story and makes the story impact the reader, whereas the what they do and the how they do it has less effect on them. I mean, you have to write the what and the how, because otherwise I can't see what's going on. but those are the ones that you should take words from if you have to cut. And the why and the effect are what you should always add to if you have the word count. Obviously, I always have the word count because I write in the millions of words, and I don't write flash fiction,
Yeah.
nor do I want to write flash fiction.
I will encourage people to write flash fiction as an exercise. It is a good writer's exercise to see what you can do in 300 words.
And I do force my private clients to do it.
Yeah.
But I try not to be a hypocrite in most aspects of my life, but that is one thing I'm a hypocrite on, because I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. Yeah. I don't think that way. My brain doesn't work that way. So
no, I agree, but it is a good exercise, especially if you're starting your journey on improving your writer's craft. It is a good exercise to take a writer's prompt, any writer's prompt, and see if you can write a 300-word story and how much emotion you can pack into it and so on.
Or a 1,000-word story or a 1,500-word story. I mean, like whatever you're comfortable with, but writing short forces you to focus is really what it ends up being. And so you have to focus on what words you're going to use that's going to have impact, and which words that you can trim and cut to make those. It's the same thing, in marketing. When I'm doing a convention and like Comic-Con, and they're like, give us your bio, it must be less than 200 words. I'm like, well, my bio is like 500 words. So, okay, so what can I cut that leaves the most important bits of my bio? And so it really does make you focus down onto weighing everything on an image. So yeah, I definitely think that you should, as an exercise, you should write short, 100%.
It's worth seeing how much you can focus down and zero in on those concepts.
And still deliver your theme, which
still deliver your theme.
I want to really, really, really give credit to this author for doing such a great thematic job of this story. There's always ways to improve everything, including anything I write or you write or Shakespeare wrote or anything. So don't take it negative that we're like literally now the half of this thing is read now. So don't take that wrong. Everything can be improved. Like I said, last night I was doing something that's already kind of been edited. It not as the fullest extent, but still. And I'm like, why did I do it that way? Change, edit, change. So you can always do that. So don't get discouraged by that, because you hit the big things. You connected me to the character. You gave me a thematic element that impacts me as a human, which means I'm going to walk away from this story remembering the story. Because remember, I say this all the time, the only thing the reader walks away with is what the story made them feel. And if the story doesn't make them feel anything, which so many of today's movies and shows and stuff like that don't. That's why, you loved Ted Lasso so much, because in every episode you feel something. You feel the pain that they go through, the joys of their accomplishments, the struggles of their decisions, the love and loss of their relationships. Those writers did a great job of always making sure that you knew the feelings of what was going on in those episodes. And so yeah, that's it. That's all you walk away with. So this story wins because of the fact that every reader, even the original way it was written, every reader is going to walk away feeling something.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're going to like this story.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we could do something about that paragraph with the repeated rooms, but I don't think it's really necessary. We've made the line edits that are important.
Right.
And I think overall, I'm happy with, like, as I say, I was very impressed with the quality of the thematic elements delivered here and the ease with which you connected to the character.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop.
And the levity of it. I mean, it's obviously satirical and funny, and so there's a lightheartedness to it.
Yeah.
But there's a lightheartedness to it with a pretty dark theme. And that's a nice dichotomy between, the thematic element of relationships, and not valuing what you have, what you've been given, versus the fact that they're eyeballs and, they're doing this thing.
Yeah.
So that's also a beautiful thing to see in prose. Yeah.
And all of those things are things that I really, really appreciated. And, I did enjoy it on the first read through, and I enjoyed critting it again now and exploring those thematic elements. Now, that story did lead me, as I said when we started this journey, to the importance of attaching the reader to the character. So I was reading not the first chapter in the book, but an introductory chapter of a character. And it started with a character running through a maze. But I don't know why the character's running through the maze. And then she feels panicky, but I don't know why it matters. And then like a paragraph later, it turns out that she can climb up onto the walls of the maze and look over it. So clearly, I mean, I don't understand where the panic's coming from. And I still don't understand what she's doing in the maze. And it goes on for like a page and a half. And I was just like, but I don't feel anything. I don't care. And
I'm assuming, because I haven't read it, but I'm assuming also there was no conflict other than
she's in a maze.
She doesn't like, she doesn't like being in the maze, but there's no, it's not actively working against her. There's no monsters, there's no sounds chasing her or any of that stuff.
So afterwards, she felt she was feeling pent up and cooped up. She's a shape changer, so she changed shape and went running through the maze in order to get rid of this pent up energy. I find that out like 2 pages later, and like this doesn't. I feel like I wasted a page and a half of reading. You know.
But notice the funny thing is, notice what your complaints were in every term. Yeah. It was why. Yes. Why? Again, it's the why and the effect.
Yeah.
Connect them to the why and the effect. Don't worry about the how and the what. So he gave you a lot of hows and whats. She's running through this maze, and this is what it looks like, and this is what she does next, and this is how she does it, and blah, 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 blah. And yet you're completely unfulfilled 2-3 pages into it because there's no whys and there's no effects. So that's why I teach the way I teach, which is don't worry about the what's in the house. Worry about the whys and the effects. That's what you focus on. Every scene, your reader must know why things are going on. They must know the effect that it's having on the character and the world around them. Yes, obviously you have to give them the what's in the house. Obviously, it's insane to say that, Drake's saying that I don't need to ever write any what's or house. No, I can't see it without the what's in the house. Yeah. But those aren't the important things. You just use enough words to make sure that I can see, and experience the scene. Yeah. But what I'm going to walk away with is, why am I here? And why am I doing this? Yeah. And why does it matter? And what effect is that going to have on me once I get through this?
You have to give me the character's motivation for being in the position they're in. And you have to give it to me fast.
Every scene, not just the opening of a novel. Every opening of every scene.
Now often, and I mean, I've had this comment on, because I've now gotten into the habit of, at the end of every of my chapters that I put up on Critique Circle, I ask, is there anything that hooked you in early in the thing? Now, quite often I get the response, the previous chapter hooked me, which is true. Okay, because the mystery novel that I'm putting on there is literally one into the next, like a metronome, right? It's a first-person mystery novel. The tension line runs like a steel hawser through there. And yes, so once you're in it, your hook can be a flow through from the previous chapter. But in your first chapter, dear God, you have to give me that motivation fast.
Yeah. Well, what you're doing is you're purchasing the reader's loyalty. And then once you have the currency with that, once you can afford to do it, then you might, because I have chapters all the time that the chapter itself is not going to hook you, where it stands, because it's not about that. There's some other, like the one that always pops to mind is in the first book of the Genesis saga, where it starts off with just pronouns, and this person is leaning out a window, and then they feel themselves lean out a window, and then they feel themselves walk across the room, and they feel themselves being sit down. I don't write it like this, but that's what basically is going on. And so not only are you disconnected, you have no idea who you are, but you also, the character doesn't even know who they are. And so I don't hook you and give you the motivation, everything, until like the second page of that. But this is chapter 20 something or whatever. So I've bought your loyalty. And at that point, you're going to give me a couple pages.
Yeah.
You know that you love the story and that you love the characters and that I'm going to get somewhere eventually. So you're willing to give me that. And so many authors forget that. They think, well, I love this story, so obviously I can open it with this thing and they'll just trust me and keep reading to get to where they'll love it later. It's like, no, they'll put the book down. They owe you nothing at that point. You have not earned anything.
It's the same reason why it's the same problem with flashbacks. If your flashbacks are in the first chapter, I don't care about your character. I don't care about their past. I care about the only thing that you've got is you have my attention for maybe the first chapter to attach me to the character they are today and the conflict they're experiencing today. And if you don't do that, I will not keep reading.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's
like, obviously, if I'm critiquing your work, I will obviously keep reading. I mean,
but then that's not making the author any money.
But that's not making the author. So if I am a reader, you have I will normally give you the first chapter. I will normally read the first chapter. If your first chapter does not deliver a conflict and attachment to the character as they are, I won't read chapter 2. That's it.
That's another funny difference between us that I find. So you're much more critical on certain aspects that I'm just like, I'm good with that. I'll just let that go. I won't give you more than a page and a half. Like, I don't care. If you can't hook me in a page and a half, you are not worthy of my time. So I won't give you the first chapter, period. Like, so it's kind of funny what thing. Sorry, I ran over my dog. Well, you shouldn't sit under my chair.
Well, if you flash back in the first page, I probably won't finish the chapter.
Right.
To be fair. I'd be like, nope, I'm done.
So, yeah.
Because I do have my foibles and they are strong.
Yeah, I mean, but that's this is the way it works. This is the other kind of cool thing about this to think about is extrapolate that to your entire fan base. And I don't mean your fan base, but the entire readership. That's why you'll never run a 5 out of 5 stars. You'll never have everyone love your book. You'll never, and most authors I've found are a lot like me with a hardcore pleaser personality. I want people to be happy. And so when they're not, it just eats me up inside. And it took me a long time to get over the fact that, I can't please everybody. Like, you just can't. It's a subjective thing. And so now, I'm to that point where when somebody's like, I didn't really like what you wrote, I'm like, oh, okay. There are plenty of other authors out there.
Yeah.
Go find yourself one. Like, because I have so many people who do love what I do, I can afford to not have every single one of them. So and that's a good lesson to learn is you're never going to please everybody. I'm still shocked that I run, most of my new stuff now is all running 4.7, 4.8, 4.9 out of 5 stars. And to me, that blows me away. But, so because it's still subjective.
Yeah. But I do feel like if there's one lesson you take away from this podcast, it is attach the reader to the character by means of their motivation, the conflict, and their emotions. Like, why are they in this position? Why are they doing this? What is the conflict and how do they react to it? These things will attach the reader to the character. And once you have the reader attached to the character, I promise you they will read over every he thought to himself. Heck, so I've just finished Kashil's Servant. Yeah, Jacqueline Carey's latest novel. Now, as you should know, Jacqueline Carey is one of my favorite authors of all time. And there is literally nothing she can write that I will not read. Like, I'm like that about her. Seriously, it just is like that.
Because she's bought your loyalty.
Yeah, so I'm a super biased, when it comes to her work. But She attached me to the character of Now, I was already attached to Jocelyn because this is a write of the same events of Cashield's Dart, but from his perspective, whereas previously I'd read them from Phaedra's perspective. She attached me to Jocelyn right at the start in the same way that I was attached to Phaedra. There are twice in the book, and I know there are twice in the book because I stopped each time that I read it. And there's twice in the book where in a first-person narrative, bear this in mind, in a first-person narrative with very limited magic, like super limited magic, she writes, I thought to myself. She has words in italics, and then she says, I thought to myself. And I stopped both times. I was like, really? And then I just read on.
Right.
Because she has bought my loyalty to the point where I don't care. Like I read straight over those line edits, you know.
But I mean, it's the same thing. You know, I get into a lot of discussions with some hoity-toity authors, and they'll be like, you know, I don't understand why Twilight was such a success. It's so horribly written. I'm like, yeah, it is. But the story earned the audience, because even like the audience members will say, oh yeah, no, it's not very well written.
Yeah.
Like, but they
but
don't
I love
care.
it. Yeah.
Right. But
They'll
they
say,
don't care
exactly.
because they fell in love, whatever it was about the story, about the connection between the character and them, whatever it was, that's what hooked them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, on the one hand, I know this, and so I know that the fact that I pushed myself that every single sentence must be, you know, pristine, it's really kind of an insane way to do this because of the fact that, you know, whatever. But it also means now that I'm writing, you know, because I'm no longer trying to write better, I'm now trying to write faster so I can get more stuff out to my fan base. When you write faster, you're going to have more mistakes and errors. When you said that about Jacqueline Carey, I said, yeah, one of the latest Brandon Sanderson stuff that I wrote. And I've heard him actually say not to do this in his classes, because I also say it in my classes. He wrote, you know, he thought to himself. And it's like,
yeah.
Who else is he thinking to? Like, you don't have telepathy
Yeah.
In this world. So obviously, you know, whatever. So yeah, the faster you write, you're going to lose quality. And I know this. I'm just hoping that I've pushed myself to such a high level of quality that when I come down, I'm still better than most writers.
And I mean, that's that's the thing. Like, they will always, you know, and when you send things to us and we line edit it, bear that in mind, you know.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we are going to rip it apart, and it is to help you understand how to be a better writer in terms of writing craft. That is what line editing is for. It is there to improve your writer's craft. In a massive book, I know for a fact I could find line editing mistakes in both Ducal Air and Hidden Blade and the third book. Like, there is no way I've written perfect novels, you know. So don't don't be too harsh on that. But at the same time, if you push yourself so that it becomes a pattern, the cleaner you write on your first draft, the better and the easier your edits go and the faster you can write.
And the better the final draft is.
Yeah. So, you know, write clean and you get there faster.
So yeah, like, if let's say you're going to do 5 drafts. Well, if you start with a crappy first draft, then how high can you actually push those 5 drafts? Where if you start with a really clean first draft, you're only going up in every one of your drafts. So like, that means that final draft is going to be even better.
So if I put this in practical terms, if your first draft is filled with passive voice and it's got a lot of wases and words and hats and there's a lot of flashbacks and all that kind of crap, and then your second draft is just fixing that. Maybe your third draft is looking at what you can replace adverbs with. Maybe your fourth draft, you might have a first pass at looking at stronger verbs.
And emotions.
And emotions.
Yeah.
Whereas if your first draft was clean, it had no flashbacky stuff, it had no passive voice,
filtering.
And no filtering. All of it was just nicely clean. Your second draft is, how do I replace all my adverbs? And your third draft is, how do I get to verbs and how do I make my verbs right, and how do I
add more emotion and more
add more
depth.
emotion. Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. And it's actually funny that you said that. So last night in the writer's room, and for those that don't know, I did launch a private online writing community. It's writersroom.us, writersroom.us. You can actually go check it out. It's all live. I had my first community critique pod. I'm calling them critique pods instead of critique groups because I only allow 5 readers. And one of the guys brought this thing in. It was a first person piece. And I read it. And at the end of it, I was like, look, I can't give you examples. I don't understand why I feel this way. But it just doesn't feel like a well-written first person piece. It feels very narrative instead of being that first person strong voice.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of lines in there that had some really good, strong first person voice in it. But for whatever reason, it just didn't feel right to me. And then he said, oh yeah, I actually wrote it in third person first. And then I went and edited it to first. And I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like you switch POV narrative styles, and that is a hard thing to do and edit. And I was like, look, you've only written this one chapter, put it aside, don't look at it again, and rewrite the whole thing from scratch in first person. And I guarantee you it will feel better because he's a good writer. But trying to take something from third person, which feels much more narrative heavy, and turn that into this natural flowing voice of first person, it's just not going to happen in an edit. So it's kind of the same.
You are not going to edit third person to first person. Yeah. I don't care how good you are at editing. You are just not.
You've got to rewrite.
You've got to rewrite it because the as we discussed when we discussed the two true differences between those two styles, first person is so critically important on the voice, and you cannot edit that voice in. That voice is there from the start, or it is not.
Yeah. And so to a lesser extent, not obviously that's the extreme, but to a lesser extent, it's the same with passive versus active voice. It's the same with, do we have a base that we can add emotions to unless we just put them in from the beginning or whatever. It's all relative. It's all the same. The better you can make that first draft, which means the more you push yourself to learn this stuff, the more it becomes your voice, your author's voice. Like that's why it's so hard for me when I'm doing, when I'm making my classes, I always have bad examples in there. I literally now, I'm so happy that ChatGPT exists because I now go to that and I go, make me a bad example of X. And then it'll give me it. And I'm like, okay, good. Because I struggle trying to write a bad sentence. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. It's that I've literally pushed it so far out of my writing style that it becomes very difficult for me to speak in bad prose.
Writing craft, as we've said multiple times, writing craft is a skill. It is like a muscle. You practice it enough and it becomes muscle memory, and you just naturally write like that.
100%.
Like, practice.
Time and
get
effort.
the first edit as close, get the first draft as close as you can, and then edit upward from there. And connect the reader to the character. Like, if you do that, they will read through everything. If you hook the reader onto the character, they will read through every line editing mistake.
Yep.
And I think that
is something that I forget. Just last thing is something I forget when I'm going through my stuff, like last night, going through that marketing piece, and I'm like, why did I write it like that? And I read it at the critique group because there were only 3. We're just launching the writer's room. So we have, 15, 20 members right now. So since we didn't have 5, I went ahead and read that because I just wanted to get feedback on, because it's a marketing piece. So it's literally the moment where the big bad falls in front of the POV character. And so it's just the big bad monster being described and the emotions that he's feeling and but nothing happens. I mean, it just literally falls and then turns and looks at him. It's maybe 300, 400 words long. And I think it was actually 500 words long. Again, I don't write short. But all I was really doing was, if you read this, would you go, oh, okay, this guy can write and I want to read this. But of course, it's a critique group, so everyone's mind is on critiquing. So they were like, if you added this word here, or you know, if you think about this a little differently or whatever. And I'm like, damn it. Like, because you know, obviously I'm always going to want to improve the piece. But at some point you just have to go, yeah, but that's because you're focusing in on this one job in this one, you know, 5-paragraph section, and you're looking for problems. Anyone who's just reading that scene and just experiencing the moment of this fight and the monster dropping in and all this stuff, you're not going to see, because there's this one line, because the monster's covered in fire, and it's from a liquid, and so it shakes. And I wanted to paint this picture of this spray of fire, liquid fire, as it sprayed off the beast as it shook. And so I wrote, like a dog coming in out of the rain, fire, whatever, however I explained it, but it was the dog, like a dog shaking after it came in out of the rain, or something like that. And one of the critiquers was like, you know, it really threw me out, because I see this little Yorkie come in. I mean, the monster's like 9 feet tall. And he's like, yes, it really threw me out, because I'm imagining like this little puppy. Like, why would you imagine that? I just described a 9-foot tall monster. Why would your brain go to a Yorkie? Like, not even a Great Dane? You don't see a big wolf-like dog? No, you saw a Yorkie? But that's an easy fix. And even though it didn't bother me, I just, instead of, you know, it read like a dog coming in out of the rain. Now it reads like a massive dog coming out of the rain. Like, I just threw massive in there just to make sure, because if it'll, I would never have seen that. Nor will most people say. I don't think most, because the other readers that were there were like, I mean, I just saw a big dog. I mean, it is a big thing. It didn't shrink in size when you said a dog coming out of the rain. But for one reader, they were like, yeah, no, it shrank to the size of a Yorkie. And I'm like, okay, I could throw in massive. That's an easy adjective to add, and it doesn't slow the scene down or anything like that. So of course you can always, but I guarantee you, like, you've read that scene where the brood mother drops from the trees and is on fire. I mean, did you stumble over the fact that it shook like a dog? Did you like, oh my goodness, I see a Yorkie? Or did you just see fire flinging out into the night?
No, sure. I would probably have used the word bear rather than dog. But that's just.
But bears don't come in out of the rain.
Ooh, you have not met Finnish bears.
Okay, I'll give you that. But you don't invite a bear into your house after, you know, out of the rain.
They didn't invite the brood mother either. She just opened the door.
True. So yeah. Yeah, still, I mean, you know, the other thing is you also, a lot of writers, and I know we're getting off the subject, we're at time, but a lot of writers also are going to write their, you know, your author's voice comes from your well of experience. And even though I don't sound it anymore, I'm a deep Southern country boy. And so one of the things about the South is we have a lot of colloquialisms, a lot of them. You know, he was as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a rocking chair factory. Like, we would say that as a part of conversation, whereas the rest of the country thinks that that's funny and silly. Like, that's literally just how we talk. And so that does come into my writing. So, like, you know, the image of a dog doing it, shaking to get water. I feel like everybody has seen that in slow motion, even, because there's been so many, you know, videos and movies that'll have that scene with a dog shaking. And so to me, it paints the exact picture of what I'm trying to do. And then you just have to add fire to it instead of water.
Yeah.
And so I like it. And so I'm not, because he was like, I would remove it. It threw me out completely. I'm like, well, I'm not going to remove it because I like it.
I don't like, I wouldn't necessarily like, as I say, I didn't have any problems with that. I didn't trip over it. The only thing is, like, I would probably not have made it a dog, but that's just because not because I see them as small, but because I tend to associate dogs with friendly. So I'd be a little bit afraid of, like, dropping the tension levels by implying that it's friendly. But that's such a minor nitpick.
Exactly.
You have to be so deep into nitpicking there.
Right. So that's the thing, is I just wanted to close with this. When we are editing, remember, we're actually looking for things to change. Whereas when someone's just reading it for pleasure, they're just going to be so engrossed in the fog and the fire and the big massive monster and all the death that's running around, you know, in this scene, and this terrifyingness of being in front of this thing and all. They're not going to, like, I even use violent. I use violently and violent in that 500 words. So I've changed it now because I can't have that, but I guarantee you no one's going to notice that when they're in the moment, because they're gripped in the moment. And so that's the other thing you have to do as a writer when you are in editing mode and when you're being critiqued by others and others are editing you. You also have to keep in mind, does the story flow? Is it going to do its job? And, you know, I know from feedback and everything else that I do that by rote. I'm constantly you know, anybody who's just reading me to read me is going to absolutely love it. But the reason is because of how much effort I put into, oh crap, I wrote violently and violent within 500 words of each other. Let me change one of them, because that's just one more thing that makes the reader fall into the story even more.
Yeah.
So like with you, with Jacqueline Carey, you hit, you know, I thought to myself, and you stopped reading. The movie in your head paused for you to go, and then the movie started up again.
Yeah.
Like, but if she had just eliminated those two things, you wouldn't have had that hiccup.
Yeah.
And so it's just about pushing yourself to understand that we want to have as few hiccups as possible. And so that's why I added a massive dog, because, you know, when I threw that at him, he's like, yeah, okay, I could go with massive dog. And then that 1 in 1,000 people that are going to see a Yorkie, or 1 in 1,000,000 people that are going to see a Yorkie, now they're not going to see a Yorkie. You know, they'll see a big dog. Whatever. So
like nature intended.
Right. It's just the way it is.
And I think that is a good note on which to close this episode off. And we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.